Psalm 13. For the director of music, a psalm of David. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. I remember as a young child waking up from a horrible nightmare and finding myself alone in my pitch black room. Do you remember that feeling? The rising panic at an unexpected sound or unfamiliar shape. The feeling that morning will never arrive. And as we grow older, the shadows we fear can take different forms, but there's always something to make us shiver. Pain in the past, situations beyond our control, and a future we can't predict. We recognize this anxiety in Psalm 13. The writer is David. You've probably heard of him. He was the shepherd boy who killed the giant Goliath and who later became the most famous king of Israel. Amazingly, David is described as a man after God's own heart. But that doesn't mean he had a trouble-free life. As we explore David's heart and mind in Psalm 13, we can see him move through three different stages. I wonder if you can identify with any of the feelings that David describes. The first stage, David's despair. Verses 1 and 2. How long? These words are immediately striking, aren't they? Repeated 4 times, they speak of unbearable discomfort. One preacher, Charles Spurgeon, has said this should really be called the howling psalm rather than the how long psalm. We sense David's deep desperation. Why was he so sad? In verse 1, David wonders whether God will forget him forever. He's not certain that God will ever return to him. He asks how long the Lord will hide his face from him. The description of God hiding his face occurs elsewhere in the Bible as God withdraws from his people, especially because of their sin. It's possible that David is describing the heaviness of guilt and shame as he does in other psalms. But whether it is sin or circumstance, God's face, which shines upon those he blesses, now appears to be cold, distant, and clouded over. Has sin or circumstance ever left you feeling far from God with no hope? In verse 2, David tells us that he wrestles with his thoughts and has sorrow in his heart. He feels weak and helpless as his enemies triumph over him. Who is this enemy? We know that in David's life he had many enemies and was threatened many times. He experienced betrayal and tragedy in his own family. Quite often it felt for him like the whole world was against him. In Psalm 142, he says, "No one cares for my life." Have you ever felt rejected or let down by other people? Have you ever imagined that nobody is on your side, that no one understands your situation? David may have been suffering physically, mentally, spiritually, or a combination. No doubt he experienced fear, grief, worry, and sadness as we all do during difficult times. But for all his wrestling, there was only a heavy feeling of defeat, day after day after day. Waking up to this nightmare, he fears that despite his desperation, a light will never shine. It will always be dark. The friendly face of the Father will not appear again. He envisions a future without God, and it is as if he is standing on the edge of hell itself. Well, what would you do in this situation? The second stage, David's prayer, verses 3 and 4. David instinctively cries out, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God." In other Psalms too, David does not hesitate to call on God for help. His despair quickly turns to prayer. Help me, save me. And as David cries out, he gives voice to his fears. I will sleep in death. My enemies will say I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. He claims that death and failure are guaranteed unless God answers his prayers. He's not worried about saying the right words or impressing others. He's desperate. Did you know that you can be honest with God like this? In the darkness and confusion, David asks for a light. This expression of "give light to my eyes" can refer to life and energy, or insight and understanding. David recognizes that only God, as creator and sustainer, can provide these things, and he appeals to his father-like love and care. Do you remember that God cares for you deeply? And the third stage, David's praise, verses 5 and 6. The word "but" here signals the moment of change. Almost as soon as David calls out, it is as if a glimmer of light appears and he catches a glimpse of God's character. The Hebrew word for unfailing love was used to describe the very core of who God is in Exodus 34:6. Compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Now notice, David does not say that life became easy from then on out. No doubt, he still had battles, but his perceptions are changed. He simply says, I trust. Despite the hardships I face, I know that God's powerful love for me will not fail. His prayer has turned to praise. How would our lives be changed if our faith was stronger than our fear? David remembers how God has helped him in the past, and he celebrates the certainty of God's help in the future. My heart rejoices in your salvation, he says, for he has been good to me. This last word in Hebrew can also mean to wean, to grow and mature. And here he recognizes that God has been working for his benefit all along. Can you remember times when God helped you in the past? As Christians, it is as we look to Jesus, the promised Son of David, that we can say with full conviction, he has been good to me. His name literally means, the Lord is my salvation. In Jesus' perfect life, reacting to suffering and unbelief in the world, he too repeated the question, how long? In Matthew 17:17. In the garden before his death, as he contemplated drinking the full cup of God's anger because of sin, he was overwhelmed with sorrow. Mark 14:34. On the cross as he died, he cried out the words of David in Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? And As the darkness fell, he took our punishment as his own and brought us peace. Isaiah 53 verse 5. And not only did Jesus face our greatest fears, he defeated them one by one. In his resurrection, he declared a complete victory over sin and death. It is finished, John 19:30. In his ascension, he promised to prepare a place for us within his Father's house, John 14:3. As we wait for his return, he promises that the Holy Spirit will help us and be with us forever, John 14:16. We don't need to fear the shadows any longer. We can wait with confidence for the morning. David's song, which moves from helpless despair to rejoicing in God's salvation, can now be ours.